On the morning of March 29, 1461, England woke to a day that felt different from all the rest. Up in Yorkshire, the northern fields lay under a final blanket of late winter snow, cold, heavy, and so quiet it was unsettling. But that silence was only a surface, because on that frozen ground, a battle was waiting to ignite. One that history would remember as the bloodiest slaughter of the Wars of the Roses. And the most frightening truth of all was that both sides knew it. Today, they had not come to negotiate. On one side stood the House of York, beneath the banner of the White Rose, led by Edward IV. On the other stood the House of Lancaster, loyal to the deposed king, Henry VI, beneath the Red Rose. Edward had just been proclaimed England's new king, but a crown newly placed on the head has never meant a throne truly secure. If Edward wanted his title to become reality, he needed one thing: a decisive blow. And across the divide, Lancaster's champion, Henry Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, carried an equally iron will to put Henry VI back where he believed he belonged. And so, the entire country was pulled to the edge by the sword. Years earlier, England had already been torn in two, split between the two roses. The conflict surged to a peak after Wakefield, 1460, where Richard, Duke of York, Edward's father, was killed. Then came St. Albans, 1461, the moment Lancaster briefly seized control again. But Edward was young, and youth carries a stubborn kind of endurance. He reversed his fortunes at Mortimer's Cross, then marched into London in victory, where he was proclaimed king. Even so, that power was fragile, because Lancaster's retreat north wasn't the collapse of an army. It was a regrouping under Somerset and Queen Margaret of Anjou. If Edward wanted to truly be king, he had to do what every king fears most: fight a battle to the death, one that would lock his claim to the throne in blood and iron. On Palm Sunday, the two sides faced each other near the village of Toutton. The battlefield stretched more than a mile across, hemmed in by marshy ground and rolling hills. Snow kept falling, unceasing, relentless. The cold was so sharp it felt like your breath could cut your throat. Modern historians estimate the combined strength of both armies at 50,000 to 65,000 men, about 1 to 2% of England's population at the time. That number alone tells you the truth. This wasn't just a battle. It was a nation being wrung dry. And on the Yorkist side, Edward was at a disadvantage. He had fewer men, and the forces of the Duke of Norfolk had not yet arrived. In that moment, every decision could become the line between a crown and death. The two armies were built in nearly the same way. Longbowmen stood in the front. Light and heavy cavalry waited behind the main line and guarded the flanks. The core of both forces was made up of men-at-arms, armoured soldiers trained for close combat. Mixed among them were polearm infantry, and on each side a few hundred heavily armoured foot knights, encased head to toe in plate steel, a luxury only a handful could afford in the 15th century. On the Yorkist side, the vanguard was led by William Neville, Earl of Kent. The rear was commanded by Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, alongside King Edward himself. On the Lancastrian side, sources name Somerset, Trollope, the Earl of Northumberland, the Duke of Exeter. Yet they rarely agree on exactly who controlled which part of the line. And there was one quiet detail, dangerous in its silence. Lancastrian cavalry had been concealed nearby, hidden inside the woods known as Castle Hill Wood. With snow falling hard, no one could see everything. And in war, what you can't see is often what kills you. The north wind cut across the field like a blade, but Lord Falkenberg, Edward's commander, saw what mattered most. The wind was at their backs. He ordered the Yorkist archers to shoot first. Their arrows carried farther than expected, pushed by the gusts, and fell like iron rain onto the tightly packed Lancastrian ranks. In a blinding snowstorm, men could barely tell sky from ground. Many were struck before they even understood what was happening. Panic moved faster than any battle horn. The Lancastrians tried to answer with their own volleys, but the wind slammed into their faces. Their arrows flew short, dropped early, and sank uselessly into the frozen earth. And then York made a move that was both ruthless and brilliant. They advanced, gathered the fallen arrows, and fired them back, straight into the men who had loosed them. In that moment, the battle was no longer a simple opening exchange. It became humiliation. Beaten in the archery duel, Somerset burned with anger, and with desperation too. He gave the order for a full-scale charge. Edward understood that if he fell back, his line would be crushed. So York surged forward to meet them head-on. Thousands of men slammed together. Metal bit into metal, and then into flesh. From this moment on, there were no clean formations, no elegant lines, no space to breathe. Only a packed mass of bodies, rising heat, and a cold that steadily drained strength from every limb. The fight became a long, grinding crush. Neither side could break the other. But Lancaster held the advantage in numbers, and reinforcements under the Earl of Northumberland added even more weight. They forced York back, inch by inch, driving them toward the water behind them. For 3 brutal hours, the snow underfoot changed colour. Men slipped on snow soaked through with blood. The dead lay so thick that soldiers fought while standing on corpses, hacking and stabbing above the piled bodies. And the sound of steel striking steel, again and again, was like a storm that would not end. As the deadlock ground both sides down, the hidden danger finally revealed itself. From Castle Hill Wood, the Lancastrian cavalry suddenly burst out, smashing straight into York's left flank. The line wavered. Some men began to run, and in war, once a few start running, collapse can spread like fire in a strong wind. Edward was forced to do what no king wants to do, but what a king sometimes must do. He rode into the danger himself, took direct control of the left, fought beside his men, and called them back, ordering them to stand, pulling them into line again. That presence, a king in the mud, the snow, and the blades, kept many from breaking. But even so, York was still on the edge of snapping. And then, right at that moment, something appeared in the distance, an image that could change the fate of the entire day. On the far horizon, John Mowbray, Duke of Norfolk, finally appeared, bringing fresh Yorkist men. He drove his heavy cavalry forward, infantry close behind, straight into the killing ground. And then the impact came. Norfolk's mounted knights slammed into Lancaster's left flank. The damage wasn't only physical, it was psychological, because after hours of hacking, shoving, and freezing in place, one hard blow to the side is enough to make a tired army feel its heart drop. Lancaster kept fighting, but the balance had shifted. The Red Rose soldiers, exhausted, numb with cold, could no longer hold the line. And when that line broke, what followed was no longer simply defeat. It was catastrophe. When Lancaster saw their formation collapsing, they turned and ran. Small groups scattered, each searching for a way to live. Many threw away weapons and armor, hoping to run faster than the men behind them. But York showed no mercy. The retreat quickly became a slaughter. Behind the Lancastrians was Beck, a swollen, icy river, its banks slick with mud and blood. Hundreds rushed into the water. Their armor dragged them down. They died in the cold, under the weight of the very thing that had once protected them. Others were caught and cut down as Yorkist cavalry rode them down. The chronicles say no prisoners were taken. Edward had chosen a policy of total destruction. The battle was so brutal that some accounts claimed 28,000 men died, making Toutton the bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil. And if you ever ask, what is a crown worth? The answer is written on that red snow. Towton was not just a battle. It was a day when England was reforged in blood. After years of the country being split between the White Rose and the Red Rose, Towton delivered a cold but unmistakable turning point. Whoever held the field that day earned the right to call himself king. York's victory wasn't simply the defeat of an army. It shattered Lancaster's military strength at the most decisive moment possible. And the cost was horrifying. Yorkshire's white snow became a burial shroud for tens of thousands. The chronicler's figure of 28,000 dead isn't just meant to shock. It's a reminder that medieval power was paid for with real bodies, not declarations. Towton also left a lasting scar in the English memory. It showed that civil war, brother against brother, can be more brutal than war against a foreign enemy. It proved that a crown isn't kept by legitimacy alone, but by discipline, timing, and ruthlessness. And it opened a window for Edward IV to strengthen his rule, while also planting the seeds of later revenge, because in a war like this, every great family loses someone, and every loss becomes a reason to hate. In other words, Towton didn't end the Wars of the Roses, but it changed how the war would be decided from that point on. If you've ever heard of the Wars of the Roses as a list of names and dates, Towton reminds us that behind every line of history were real people, walking on snow, shaking from the cold, and still forced to make life or death choices. So let me ask you this. If you were Edward IV, what would you have done? Would you show mercy to try to end the hatred, or strike without hesitation so no one could rise against you again? Leave a comment and tell me where you stand. End it quickly to save lives, or finish it decisively to end the war. And if you'd like to follow this channel through the next great battles, subscribe so you don't miss the next video.